The wind whipped across the flight deck of the USS Constellation, carrying the sharp metallic tang of the sea and the thunderous roar of jets launching into the gray sky. Admiral John Hawk Hawkins barely felt it. After 30 years in the Navy, the constant assault on the senses was as familiar as his own heartbeat. He stood on the observation deck, a monolithic figure against the horizon, his eyes the color of a winter storm, scanning the organized chaos below. And he was a man carved from granite and duty, his face a roadmap of hard decisions and heavier losses. His entire world was the ship, the men and women on it, and the mission. Today, the mission was an inspection. But for Hawk, it was a homecoming of sorts. This was his first deployment as the commander of the Naval Special Warfare Command, and being back on a carrier, feeling the thrum of the engines through the soles of his polished shoes, brought a familiar ache with it. And it was a reminder of a past he had long since buried beneath layers of rank and responsibility. The new batch of SEALs, fresh from the crucible of Bud/S and SQT, were being integrated into the various teams on board. He'd meet them later, offer the obligatory words of steely-eyed inspiration. He'd done it 100 times. He'd look into their young, eager faces, see the fire and the fear, and he'd give them the speech about brotherhood, about duty, and about being part of something larger than themselves. He never mentioned the cost. He never mentioned the faces that haunted his own dreams. He turned from the view and made his way down to the hangar bay, where the informal meet and greet was set up. The space was a cavern of activity, filled with the skeletal frames of helicopters and the constant hum of maintenance work. In a cordoned-off area, a group of about 20 new operators stood in relaxed but attentive clusters. And they were the tip of the spear, the best of the best, and they carried themselves with a quiet confidence that Hawk recognized instantly. It was the same quiet he'd seen in himself, decades ago. He began his circuit, moving from group to group. He offered a few words to each, a firm handshake, a probing question about their specialization or their training. He saw the mix of awe and respect in their eyes. To them, he wasn't just an admiral. He was a legend, a name whispered in the teams. Yet he hated and accepted it in equal measure. He approached a smaller group huddled near the landing skid of a MH-60R Seahawk. There were 3 of them, 2 men with the close-cropped hair and bulky frames of breachers, and one figure slightly apart, leaning against a tool locker with an easy, predatory grace that immediately put Hawk on alert. This one was leaner, the posture not of a brawler but of a watcher. A sniper. You could always tell. They had a stillness about them, had a way of assessing a room not for threats, but for angles, for distances, for the perfect, silent shot. As he got closer, the sniper straightened up, turning to face him. It was a woman. For a fleeting second, the Admiral's composure flickered, not with disapproval, but with a sharp spike of curiosity. Women in the teams were still a rarity, a subject of intense debate. And here stood one, already graduated, already with a sniper's badge pinned to her chest. But her face was partially shadowed by the brim of a baseball cap, but he could see a strong jawline and eyes that held his gaze without flinching. She was young, maybe mid-20s, but her eyes held a depth that spoke of something far beyond her years. He stopped in front of their group. The 2 breachers snapped to attention. The sniper followed suit a beat later, her movements fluid and controlled. "As you were," Hawk's voice rumbled. He nodded to the breachers. "Chief Miller, I'm Petty Officer Jones. Good to have you aboard. I read your file from the Morocco op. Solid work." "Thank you, sir," they chorused, their chests puffing out slightly. Then his gaze shifted to the woman. She was tall, her frame suggesting a wiry strength. Her uniform was crisp, her boots polished to a high shine. He looked at the name tape sewn above her right pocket. It read, Riley. "And you must be our new long-range shooter," he said, his voice neutral. "Petty Officer Riley, Yes, sir, she replied. Her voice was low and even, with no trace of nervousness. First deployment with a team? Yes, sir. Cross-commissioned from the Army last year, had to go through the pipeline. Army. That explained the immediate skill set. The Army produced exceptional marksmen. But to leave that world and voluntarily enter the hell of BUD/S, to earn the Trident, that took a different kind of drive, a kind he understood all too well. Good for you, he said, and he meant it. When he was about to move on, to continue his circuit, when a flicker of movement from her drew his attention. As she had shifted her weight, the short, rolled-up sleeve of her uniform top had ridden up just a fraction of an inch on her right arm. It was enough to reveal the edge of a tattoo. It was a small, intricate design, just a glimpse of dark ink. But the shape was unmistakable. It was the stock of a rifle, the beginning of a scope, a sniper's rifle, rendered in meticulous detail. It was a common enough tattoo among their kind, but the way it was rendered, the specific, almost artistic style of it, it hit him like a physical blow to the chest. It was a ghost from his past, inked onto the skin of a stranger. "Hold on," he said, the words escaping him before he could stop them. The two breachers froze. Petty Officer Riley looked up, a flicker of confusion in her calm eyes. Hawk took a step closer, his eyes fixed on her arm. "Tell me your name," he said, his voice losing its official timbre and dropping to a low, rough command. The question was wrong. He'd just read her name tape. The confusion on her face deepened. "Petty Officer Maya Riley, sir," she said, slower this time, as if speaking to someone who might not understand. But Hawk wasn't listening. He was looking at the tattoo. He took another step, closing the distance between them, and with a gesture that was both a command and a plea, he pointed a thick finger at her arm. Show me." For a moment she hesitated, glancing at her teammates, then back at the Admiral's intense, stormy gaze. Slowly she reached up with her left hand and pushed the fabric of her sleeve higher, bunching it up over her bicep to reveal the full tattoo. The world seemed to stop for Admiral John Hawkins. It wasn't just any sniper's rifle. It was a specific one. An M40A3, the stock adorned with a pattern of interlocking Celtic knots that flowed into the scope. And beneath it, in elegant, a flowing script, were two words: Seraphim's Watch. The air left Hawk's lungs. His heart, a reliable engine for 6 decades, stuttered painfully in his chest. His face, usually a mask of command, went pale beneath its tan. The noise of the hangar bay faded to a dull, distant roar. He was no longer on the USS Constellation. He was transported back 22 years to a dusty, God-forsaken village in the Shah-e-Khat Valley, to the sharp crack of a rifle and the heat of a dying sun. Then he saw himself, a younger, leaner lieutenant commander, pinned down with his 4-man reconnaissance team in a shallow irrigation ditch. He heard the chatter of AK-47s, the deeper thump of a rocket-propelled grenade. He felt the wet, sticky warmth of his best friend's blood soaking through his combat shirt as Chief Petty Officer Marcus Seraph Williams lay dying in his arms. Marcus, his spotter, his brother. The man with the unnerving blue eyes and the hands of an artist. Who could paint watercolors in his off time and paint the forehead of a target at 1,000 yards with his rifle. He had earned the call sign Seraph because his teammates swore they'd seen him put a bullet through a slit trench from an impossible angle, like a fiery angel delivering judgment. He was the calm in the storm, the man who could talk Hawk down from the edge of panic with a quiet joke over the radio. He was the one who had bled out in that ditch, his life fading as Hawk held him, a useless and screaming inside. The last thing Marcus had done, with his final shreds of strength, was grip Hawk's wrist and pull his hand down to his own chest, pressing it over his still heart. His eyes, that startling blue, had held Hawks with an intensity that defied the pain. "Tell her, tell Lily. Her daddy was a good man. Tell her I was watching." His voice had been a gurgling whisper. "Tell her, the angels, they were with me." And then his eyes had gone still, staring at the sky. And Hawk had carried that moment with him every single day. He had buried his friend at Arlington. He had written the letter to Marcus's wife, a beautiful woman named Sarah, trying to put into words the heroism of her husband, but failing to capture the essence of the man. He had sent money anonymously for years, had checked in on them from a distance through a private investigator a decade ago, only to find Sarah had passed away from cancer. The trail on the daughter, Lily, had gone cold. She had been just a toddler when her father died. The investigator's report said she'd been adopted by her maternal aunt after her mother's death and had moved away, the new family's name lost in a sea of paperwork. Hawk, consumed by his own career and the ever-present guilt of survival, had let the trail die. He had failed Marcus again. And now, 22 years later, he was staring at his legacy. He looked from the tattoo, Seraphim's watch, to the young woman's face. Then he looked past the strength, the discipline, the calm. He looked for the ghost of his friend, and there it was, in the set of her jaw, in the directness of her gaze, in the slight, almost imperceptible cleft in her chin. It was Marcus. It was all Marcus. "Sir?" Maya's voice cut through the fog, laced with genuine concern now. "Admiral, are you all right?" The two breachers were staring, wide-eyed. The legendary Admiral Hawkins, the man made of steel, was swaying on his feet. Hawk blinked, so forcing himself back to the present. He drew in a shaky breath, a sound so uncharacteristic it made Maya take a half-step forward, as if to catch him. "That tattoo," he managed, his voice rasping. He pointed again, his finger trembling slightly. "Where did you get it?" Maya's professional demeanor flickered, a wall of privacy slamming down behind her eyes. "It's a personal piece, sir. A tribute." "To whom?" The question was a demand, raw and urgent. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, and the breachers looked anywhere but at the two of them. Maya's jaw tightened. She was a sailor, faced with a direct order from a flag officer. But this felt different. This felt like a violation of something sacred. "It was my father's," she finally said, her voice clipped. "His call sign was Seraph. It's all I have of him." The confirmation was another bullet, this one hitting him right in the heart he thought had turned to stone. Lily. She was Lily, but she'd said her name was Riley. "Maya Riley." "Your father," Hawk echoed, the words hollow. "Marcus Williams." The color drained from Maya's face, leaving her as pale as the Admiral. Her calm shattered, replaced by a look of raw, open shock. How do you know that name?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hangar's din. No one outside of her family knew that connection. Her records, her entire identity, was under her mother's maiden name, Riley. She had buried her father's name, his very existence. Deep within herself, a secret shrine she visited only in her most private moments. This stranger, this Admiral, had just ripped the doors off. Hawk didn't answer. He couldn't. He just stared at her, his mind reeling. He saw the little girl in the photos Sarah had sent him, the one with the big, curious eyes and the tuft of dark hair. He saw Marcus's laugh in the set of her mouth. He saw Marcus's soul in the way she stood her ground, even now, even shocked and confused. The two breachers, though sensing they were witnessing something cataclysmic, something far beyond their pay grade, silently melted away, leaving the Admiral and the young petty officer alone in a bubble of shared, devastating history. "Lieutenant Commander John Hawkins," he said finally, his voice thick. "Shah-e-Khat Valley, Operation Anaconda. I was his team leader. I was with him. Maya's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sound that was half gasp, half sob. Her eyes, so like her father's, I filled with a sudden, shimmering wetness. She stared at the man in front of her, the four-star admiral with the weathered face and the pain etched into every line. This wasn't just an officer. This was the last person on Earth to see her father alive. You were there? She stammered. You were with him? Hawk nodded, a single jerky movement. He felt the familiar weight of the story, the one he had never told, the one he had locked away in the deepest vault of his memory. He had written the official report, the cold, clinical after-action review, but he had never told the story. He had never told anyone what really happened in those final minutes. He saved us, Maya, Hawk said, her real name feeling strange and right on his tongue. Your father. He saved our entire team. The tears now spilled over onto Maya's cheeks. She had grown up on a sanitized version of events. Her father died a hero, she was told. He was killed in action, but the details were a void. A black hole in her family history that her mother had been too heartbroken to fill before she, too, passed away. She had joined the Navy, then the teams, driven by a desperate, primal need to understand, to walk the same path, to feel, somehow, closer to the ghost who had given her life, and then vanished from it. Tell me, she whispered, the words a prayer. Please, tell me. Hawk looked around the hangar bay, at the impersonal machinery of war. This wasn't the place. And this story deserved more than the cold echo of a steel room. He reached out, a gesture so uncharacteristic it surprised them both, and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. The touch was firm, fatherly, and trembling slightly. Not here, he said, his voice regaining a sliver of its command. Come with me. He led her out of the hangar bay, through a maze of passageways and up several decks, until they reached a small private observation blister that overlooked the bow of the ship. And it was his private spot, a place he came to think, to remember. The only sounds were the distant rush of the wind and the rhythmic crashing of the waves against the hull far below. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. They stood in silence for a long moment, side by side, looking out at the endless sea. The rigid protocols of rank had dissolved, yet replaced by something far more profound, the bond between the man who lived and the daughter of the man who died. Hawk began to speak. His voice was low and rough, the words dragged from a place of deep old pain. He told her everything. He told her about the mission, a simple reconnaissance that had gone catastrophically wrong. He told her about being ambushed by a much larger force, about being pinned down, about the chaos and the fear. He told her about Marcus, his calm voice on the radio, directing fire, calling in coordinates, holding the enemy at bay single-handedly while the rest of the team fought to break contact. He was a poet with that rifle, Maya, Hawk said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. I've never seen anything like it. He wasn't just shooting, he was painting. Every round was a brushstroke and the canvas was the battlefield. He kept them off us for 20 minutes. 20 minutes. It felt like a lifetime. He paused, the memory washing over him. As he could still hear the cracks, feel the concussive blasts. It was a sniper that got him, Hawk continued, his voice dropping even lower. An enemy we never saw. The round came from nowhere. It hit him in the chest. He went down hard. I crawled to him, dragged him into that ditch with me. There was so much blood, Maya. Too much. He finally turned to look at her. Her face was wet with tears, but she was listening, her whole body taut with the effort of absorbing his words. I tried to stop it. I tried everything, but I knew. I knew he was going. And he knew it too. He wasn't scared. He wasn't in pain. He looked at me with those eyes of his, and he smiled. He actually smiled. Hawk's own eyes were burning now. He hadn't cried in over 20 years. He'd forgotten how. He talked about you. His little lily bug, he called you. He talked about your mother. He told me he could see you, in his mind, laughing. He said it was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. And then he made me promise. He grabbed my hand and pressed it to his heart. He said, "Tell her. Tell Lily. Her daddy was a good man. Tell her I was watching. Tell her the angels. They were with me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with a lifetime of unsaid grief. Maya was silently sobbing now, her shoulders shaking, but she didn't look away from him. "I made him that promise, Maya," Hawk said, his voice cracking. "I held him as he died, and I swore to him I would tell you, and then I failed him. I wrote the letter, I sent the money, but I was a coward. Seeing you, talking to you, meant facing him, meant facing that day. So I let the investigators do their job, and when your mother passed and you disappeared into the system, I let you go. I told myself it was for the best, that you deserved a clean break, that my voice, my story would only bring you more pain, and I broke my promise to the best man I ever knew." He hung his head, the weight of 2 decades of guilt finally crushing him. He, Admiral John Hawkins, a man decorated for bravery, a man who had commanded thousands, stood before this young woman and confessed his greatest, most shameful failure. Maya was quiet for a long time, just staring at the sea, the tears still streaming down her face. The revelation was a tsunami. The father she had idolized, or whose ghost she had been chasing her whole life, had been a man of such profound courage and love that his last thoughts were of her laughter. And the man who had held him, the man who had been given the sacred duty of passing on that love, had been carrying it alone for over 2 decades. Finally, she turned to him. She looked at this broken, powerful man, stripped bare of his rank and his pride. She saw the guilt, the sorrow, the genuine agonizing remorse in his eyes. And she saw the friend her father had loved enough to speak of with his dying breath. Slowly, with a hand that trembled only slightly, she reached out and placed her hand over his, the one that was gripping the railing so tightly his knuckles were white. The touch was electric. It was a connection across a gulf of 22 years. It was the daughter of Marcus Williams reaching out to the man who had held him. "You didn't fail him, Admiral," she said, her voice thick with tears but strong. But so like her father's. "You're here. You're telling me now." Hawk looked at her hand on his, then up into her eyes. For the first time in 22 years, he didn't see the dusty ditch or feel the weight of his dying friend. He saw Marcus's eyes, full of life, looking back at him through his daughter's face. He saw forgiveness. "My name is Maya," she said, a small, watery smile touching her lips. "Maya Williams. I changed it back when I enlisted. It felt right. And thank you for keeping your promise, for telling me, for being with him at the end." A great, shuddering breath escaped Hawk. It was as if a physical weight had been lifted from his chest. He squeezed her hand gently, a silent acknowledgement of a bond forged in the crucible of the past and solidified in this moment of shared grief and understanding. "Your father," he said, his voice clear and strong for the first time, "was a good man, Maya. He was the best man I ever knew. And he was watching. Yeah, he's been watching all along. He led you here. He led you to me so I could finally tell you myself." They stood there, the old admiral and the young sniper, hands clasped, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the world in shades of fire and gold. The roar of the carrier, the distant thunder of jets, it all faded into insignificance. In the vast, impersonal machinery of the United States Navy, 2 souls had found each other. A promise broken by fear was mended by courage. A ghost was finally laid to rest, not with silence, but with the truth. And on Maya Williams's arm, the tattoo of a rifle, inscribed Seraphim's Watch, was no longer just a memorial to a father she never knew. It was a testament to a love that had spanned decades, a watch that had never truly ended, finally, peacefully, coming to a close.